10 years ago when we started lab testing our coffees, I tested a lot of green coffee, and there was almost always mold spores. If I found a coffee that had 0 colony forming units of mold, I was actually amazed.
Hello, everybody. You are now watching the Health First Coffee Podcast. I'm your host, Jordan River, and I want to thank you for tuning in again today. With me, as always, is Ildi Revi, Chief Learning Officer from Purity Coffee. How are you doing, Ildi?
I am doing great, Jordan. Really looking forward to diving into this episode.
I know you love this topic. Today, we're talking about mold in coffee. It's an extremely hot topic. There's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and we're going to go over all of it today and bust some mold myths for you listeners. So, Ildi, let's kind of begin with the idea, why is this episode 1 in this podcast series? Why are we starting this show with mold in coffee?
Jordan, I get this question all the time. Our customer support team gets the question all the time about mold. And when I hear people ask the question, I think, you don't really understand what you're asking. So I really want this episode to be the most truthful, most calm, food safety focused, and basic. Let's get back to basics. Okay, so this is the thing, Jordan. We all had basic biology in school. We learned about mold in school. What our teachers taught us, we can count on that. So what this episode, the reason I want us to start with this is let's just talk calmly about this because it's actually a very calm, easy to understand subject. It's just like our 7th grade biology class.
There's a lot of fear mongering out there around mold in coffee. There's a lot of information out there around mold in coffee. What's getting misunderstood? What are people getting wrong?
Yeah. So to de-escalate this topic, the first question people ask, is there mold in coffee? So the answer is no, and yes, and maybe, which of course doesn't help anybody. So when I say moldy food, what do you think of, Jordan? What's the first thought that comes into your head?
I think of like the big, fuzzy, moldy, it's not the spores, it's the actual mildew and mold that forms, right? Like you open a bag of coffee and it's just full of white fuzz and you're like, mold in my coffee. You know what I mean?
And have you ever opened a bag of coffee and that been there? No.
I have not. I've seen coffee that's gone rancid. I've seen coffee that's been, over roasted I've not seen a roasted bag of coffee that was covered in white fuzzy mold ever in my life, actually.
Right. And I have never seen it either. And so I was like, why is this a thing? And I went into, it was interesting because I didn't look at recent things. I looked at stuff from like 15 years ago, like early Google stuff. And there were some, chat rooms back in the day, and people were asking, I opened this bag of coffee and there's this little white stuff in between the crack in the bean and the little middle part there. What is that white stuff? And they took a picture of it and it was actually mold. And I was like, wait a second. I've never seen that. And I've been in the coffee industry since 1998. And I've never seen it. And yet here it was. And I think because it was so old, it was like the innocent days of the internet. And so that made me stop and say, okay, so I can't say it doesn't exist. And the other thing is, Jordan, have you ever gone on vacation and brewed a cup of coffee and then run out the door, you and your family ran, and you forgot to empty the coffee maker?
Or maybe, for instance, you do a podcast and you drink coffee with it and you leave your half-drinking coffee, even for just a few days.
Right.
And then you come back and there is a full-blown mold growing on brewed coffee. I've seen it on brewed coffee.
Right. So we know mold can happen in roasted coffee. The question is then, how prevalent is it in a bag of coffee that you buy or other forms of coffee that you buy? So let's break this down. So let's start with, what is mold? Mold is a type of fungus. We've all seen moldy bread or moldy fruit. So you can see the green and fuzzy or the white and fuzzy. There's scary black mold in houses, and that stuff is really toxic. And so that's where I think people get afraid, is they hear mold and they think of those things. But not all mold's bad, right? So, like penicillin was discovered from moldy citrus, right? So it's derived. And cheese, blue cheese, you're eating mold. So not all molds are bad.
Right. But it gets deeper than that, though, right? Because
Please.
molds can leave behind other substances. And I know this is going to open up a whole new can of worms. We're going to do a whole episode on this. But can you talk about the difference between like a mold spore versus a toxin that's left behind by a mold?
Okay. So you just said mold spore. So a mold spore is not the mold yet.
Right.
It's the little seed of the mold. So when mold is mature, it throws out its seeds because it's, it's a living thing. It's like procreating. Right. So you can see, if you were to go to your couch and hit your couch in a sunlight, you could see the dust as it goes through. There's mold in that. There are mold spores everywhere, except for clean rooms, right? So they are not mold, though. They are the seeds of mold. So when we test for mold, they will often find mold producing colonies, or colony forming units for mold.
The unit for that type of test.
Exactly. So mold spores are just the seeds. Then you have mature mold. And as it decomposes the food it's eating, or whatever the thing it's decomposing, a leather shoe or whatever, it is digesting the thing. It's producing basically kind of, pardon me, biologists, mold saliva, and gastric juices. These produced substances are metabolites, and some of them can be toxic depending on the mold. So first of all, not all molds produce toxic mycotoxins, which are metabolites, but some molds do. And that's where we get the confusion in, because mycotoxins, they are not molds. They are metabolites of molds. They're the leftover stuff that mold has injected into the thing it's decomposing.
And in simple terms, that mycotoxin is much hardier than the living mold or even the mold spores, right? That mycotoxin hangs around. And again, we'll go deeper into this, but that mycotoxin doesn't necessarily just go away like the mold does, right?
Correct. We have a whole episode we'll do on mycotoxins. And again, not all molds produce mycotoxins.
Well, that's the confusion. That's what it seems like the confusion is right there for a lot of people.
Huge one, because that's a concern. And that's a concern in all foods, but not a fear. Calm down, everyone. We don't want to fear monger.
You make me feel better.
So let's go back to the mold now. We have mold spores and we have mold. These are things that we don't want in our food.
And we're already getting enough mold from all the other contaminations out there in the world, so we don't need to be adding another cup of mold every morning, right?
Exactly.
That's kind of the idea.
And what mold is decomposing food. We don't want to eat decomposing food. We want to eat fresh foods. The first thing is this. When we talk about coffee comes from tropical zones where there's lots of mold. There's heat, there's moisture. Mold must have certain levels of moisture to grow. Without the moisture, it will not grow. So when coffee is shipped, and this is historic, for hundreds of years, people have known you must ship coffee below at about 12% moisture or below.
Dry.
13 is pushing it.
And is that where most of the problems form right there?
Exactly. So as long as the coffee is below 0.6 water activity and below 12% moisture content, mold cannot grow. It doesn't have the moisture to grow. Now that's the green raw coffee leaving origin, and it comes and sits in a warehouse in America before it goes to the coffee roaster who roasts it. Now here's the thing. Green and fuzzy mold that should not be on that green coffee. However, if the processing isn't right, it could get moldy. If in transport something happens, it could get moldy. Why? Because there are mold spores everywhere. Green coffee has to go through what they call a dry milling process, where the outer skin of the green bean, the green seed, is removed. And these dry mills are full of dust. You can imagine, millions and millions of pounds of green coffee are getting hulled and going through these machines. So there's dust everywhere. People wear masks in these dry mills. They should wear masks. They should have good ventilation systems. But in the throes of coffee production, at the height of the season, they're putting millions of pounds of coffee through this. So they may not keep it clean. So as the coffee goes through, mold spores may be settling on the green coffee. Now, I have tested with purity. Back 10 years ago when we started lab testing our coffees, I tested a lot of green coffee, and there was almost always mold spores. If I found a coffee that had 0 colony forming units of mold in the green coffee sample I got, I was actually amazed.
Wow.
So setting the standard for mold spores in green coffee is hard because the industry is just not where we need it to be, right? And the industry needs to clean up these dry mills because we have some great, clean, beautiful green coffees. If we send it to a dry mill that is not clean, now that dry mill is going to cross-contaminate with some other farm's mold spores, my clean green coffee. But just because there's mold spores doesn't mean it's mold. It is not mold.
And maybe not even mycotoxins. So that makes it very complicated. Ildi, when you say that they haven't caught up yet, I think what you're kind of alluding to is testing is the only way that we can find this out for sure, right? Otherwise, we're just flying by the seat of our pants. If you test at different stages in the process and be able to quantify that, now we're looking at data that we can work with, right?
Well, we test for mycotoxins, all of our green coffee, before it leaves origin. And there's no mycotoxin, it tests below detectable levels at all times.
And no more will be added because at that point the plant has been harvested and there's not going to be...
Exactly. And it's below 12% moisture, right? No mold. Any mold spores that are there, they're nothing. They're little seeds sitting there not doing anything. But here's the important thing now. Roasting coffee happens at very high temperatures, 400 to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, for 10 minutes, right? Anything is going to be incinerated. Mold spores cannot survive that. No mold spore is going to survive that. The punchline I'm trying to get to is we really shouldn't be that worried about mold in roasted coffee because of the kill step that is roasting. Mm-hmm. Here is where the concern is, though. As long as the company has good food safety practices, from that roaster to the cooling bin to the transfer to the packing facility, the people packing it, the environment it's being packed in, the bags it's being packed in, sealed, put somewhere else, as long as no contamination happens between the roaster and there. And really, there should be 1 or 2 little mold spores that may be floating around the facility. These are not really a concern. Why? Because coffee is actually an antifungal and antibacterial. So it inhibits the production of mold anyway. I'm not saying it prevents it. Prevention is different than inhibition. It inhibits bacteria. It inhibits fungus. So this is important because the coffee naturally doesn't want mold to form on it. And sanitary, and people stick to their food safety protocols, the system is safe.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
If there are roasters who do not understand these basic food safety points, for example, they take the green coffee from the sacks that have come from the dry mill. What do we know about them? They've probably got mold spores on them. They take the coffee, they empty the green coffee into a bucket. They lift the bucket into their roaster. As they're doing that, dust is flying kind of everywhere. And then they let the green coffee into their roaster. Roaster does its thing. Brown coffee comes out sanitized. Here's where we have a problem. Number one, if that roaster uses the same bucket when they empty the coffee, and I've seen this, Jordan, I've seen this, they'll take the same bucket they use the green coffee, empty their roasted coffee into that same bucket. Now, what have they done?
Right,
They've
back on
come,
those mold spores.
right?
Yeah.
So don't do that, roasters. The other thing is they may not do that. They may have a scoop and they may scoop it out, or they may, whatever. Even that scoop could have mold spores on it. Nothing should go into that beautifully sanitized coffee that came out of the roaster.
Or your favorite, I was just going to say your favorite Instagram trend, which is running your hands through these beautiful, delicious roasted coffee beans. I admit it feels very good, but maybe not the best idea when it comes to mold contamination.
If it feels good, that's great. Do it with that coffee, and then don't serve that coffee to any human. Like seriously. So here they've touched the green coffee. Sometimes they'll see, oh wait, I better pick this piece of burlap out, or this, they'll run their hands through the green coffee, do everything. Now they're being good food safety people, and now it's out of the bin. Is it cool enough to transfer to the packing room? Let me stick my hand in it and feel it.
Glove up, maybe just glove up. That would be a big help.
The bigger roasters use something called water quenching to cool their coffee. The coffee comes out super hot. It's like 450 degrees, 500 degrees, whatever. And they have a device that sprays the coffee, and it goes, and steam comes off, and it cools the coffee really quickly. It's just really stops a roast, so it stops where it should be. Most water quenching is fine because it doesn't add any water. It all evaporates. But sometimes equipment can go out of calibration, and they also have to know that the food safety of the water that they're using, right? So this is where I think mold enters the roasted coffee system. Either water quenching, or somehow the moisture level gets too high. I did have a friend who worked at a very large, very, very large coffee company. Of course, I won't say the name. And they put their coffees into K-cups, into pods. I won't say K-cups because I'm not going to say the company. And this friend of mine did quality control and had to return some of them back to the production and said, look, this is at 7% moisture. It's too high. It could get moldy. So if the quality control people aren't on top of it, now we've got coffee that was water quenched. It's too moist. It's been packed into boxes, and now it goes to these large grocery chains where it may sit in a warehouse that's may not be climate controlled. It may be hot, and sit for months in a hot warehouse, and it's been exposed to moisture.
They left the beans wet.
Exactly. And so this is where I think mold can enter the roasted coffee system.